Dead America, The Fight for Kansas, Part 5, by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. The SUV hummed along the empty highway, the flat Kansas landscape stretching out in every direction. Atticus kept his hands steady on the wheel, eyes moving between the road and the mirrors out of habit. The highway was 2 lanes of cracked asphalt, cutting through fields that had gone wild weeks ago. Crops left to rot in rows that nobody was coming back to tend. Madison sat in the passenger seat with a map unfolded across her lap and a small notebook open beside it, tracing routes with her finger while occasionally glancing up at the road signs they passed. In the back seat, Piper sat behind Madison with her bad leg stretched out as much as the space allowed, her knee braced against the back of the seat in front of her. She shifted every few minutes, trying to find a position that didn't remind her of the injury. Gideon sat behind Atticus, a ninja star spinning lazily between his fingers, the metal catching the light each time it rotated. He handled it the way some people handled a pen, something to keep the hands busy while the mind worked on bigger things. Nobody had said much since leaving Ellsworth. The fight they'd left behind sat heavy in the silence. Somewhere to the west, their people were putting everything on the line at Lindsborg, drawing Bennett's strike force away, so that this SUV could slip east without being noticed. It was working. The road ahead was empty, but knowing the cost of that empty road kept the conversation short. Every mile they drove was a mile bought with someone else's risk, and nobody in the vehicle was comfortable with that math. Piper watched the Ninja Star spin for another few seconds before speaking up. "So, you're really good with those, huh?" "Better than most," Gideon said without looking up. "In fact, given the recent extreme population drop, I think it's safe to say I'm one of the best in the world." "And how exactly does one become a ninja-throwing star expert?" Atticus glanced in the rearview mirror. "You really don't recognize him, do you?" Piper stared at Gideon, studying his face for a long moment before shaking her head. "Sorry, I got nothing, but based on the tone of his voice, I'm assuming you're famous?" "Maybe not anymore," Gideon said, "but I was certainly famous at one point." Piper kept staring, then shook her head again. "Sorry, you're going to have to help me out here. I'm Gideon Rhodes, the star of the Ninja Dominator movies, amongst others." She stared at him for another beat, then shrugged. "That sounds like something my dad would have watched." Gideon visibly winced. "That's brutal." "Sorry, the whole ninja movie craze was before my time." "So I'm assuming you didn't take a film appreciation course in college then?" "My college years were spent overseas in the sandbox," Piper said. Gideon thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, that's fair. When we get through this, I'll have to introduce you to the series," Atticus said. "So my reward for surviving what is most certainly a one-way trip is I get to watch ninja movies? I'm pretty sure there will be alcohol involved." Piper considered it. "Okay, I'm in." That got a round of quiet laughter through the vehicle. It felt good. Brief, but good. "Before we get to my career highlights, however," Gideon trailed off, letting the Ninja Star go still in his hand. The humor drained from his voice, and the silence that followed was heavier than the one before the joke. "Do we have any idea what we're walking into?" "Madison, I think this is your area," Atticus said. Madison didn't respond. She was bent over the map, her finger tracing a line while she cross-referenced something in the notebook. Whatever she was working through had her full attention, her lips moving slightly as she ran the distances in her head. "Madison, you good? We need to turn left at the next highway," she said. Atticus didn't argue the point, just focused on the road ahead and made the turn when it came. The new highway ran north, cutting through more of the same flat terrain, but the fields here had a few structures dotting the horizon. Grain silos, a water tower in the distance, the scattered bones of small-town Kansas. Once they were settled on the new road, Madison relaxed slightly, folding the notebook closed and letting out a breath she'd been holding. "Anything we should be concerned about?" Atticus asked. Madison shook her head. "We were getting close to Groveland, and according to Sergeant Cook, Bennett's men have used it in the past as a scouting post, since it's just to the south of McPherson. In that case, I'm fine with the detour." "Do we have to worry about a patrol?" Gideon asked. "Doubtful. There's nothing in Groveland except for a processing plant, so if there is somebody there, they're going to be laying low." "Just in case anybody is dumb enough to try and do a prison break," Piper said. They'll know they're coming." Gideon looked at her. "If they're worried enough about a prison break to have a lookout, maybe this isn't the one-way trip you think it is." "Well, there is something that you're not considering." "And what's that?" "If you were on guard duty at a high-security prison in the zombie apocalypse, wouldn't you want a heads up so you could watch a bunch of dumbasses try and break in?" Gideon let out a sigh. "I guess you find entertainment wherever you can." "Yep." The SUV went quiet again after that. Not the tense silence from before, but something more settled. The kind of quiet that came from people who had said what needed saying and were saving the rest for later. Piper leaned her head against the window and watched the fields pass. Gideon tucked the Ninja Star away and folded his arms across his chest, his eyes half closed, but clearly not sleeping. Madison went back to the map, making small marks in the notebook with a pencil stub that was barely long enough to hold. Atticus let the silence sit. He'd been around enough operations to know that the quiet before a fight was something you didn't interrupt. People needed it. They needed the space to think through what was coming, run the scenarios in their heads, make peace with whatever they needed to make peace with. The banter earlier had been good for morale, but this was the part that actually mattered. He made another turn, working his way back toward the main road that would take them to the southern edge of McPherson. The landscape hadn't changed. Flat fields, empty farmhouses, the occasional abandoned vehicle sitting crooked on the shoulder. Kansas had a way of making you feel like you were driving in place. The same view recycling outside the windows mile after mile. The only thing that changed was the light, the sun tracking across a sky that didn't care what was happening underneath it. "Go up another mile, then pull off to the right," Madison said. "You got it." He followed her directions, turning onto a side street that cut through a small cluster of houses. The homes were dark, doors closed, yards overgrown. A few had belongings scattered on the front porches, the kind of mess that suggested people had packed in a hurry and never come back. A child's bicycle lay on its side in one driveway. The front wheel still pointed toward the road, like it was waiting for someone to pick it up and finish the ride. Atticus kept the speed low, easing the SUV around a car that had been left parked at an angle across the road, and worked through a few more turns until they were on the outskirts of what had once been a quiet neighborhood on the southern edge of McPherson. The houses thinned out as the road curved toward open ground, giving way to scrubby lots and a drainage ditch that ran along the edge of the pavement. Ahead of them, the southern approach to McPherson stretched out. He brought the SUV to a stop where the road ended at a low rise, giving them a clear view of the approach to town. All four of them leaned forward and stared through the windshield. "Binoculars," Atticus said. Madison reached into the glove box and handed them over. Atticus brought them up and adjusted the focus, scanning the view ahead. The road into town was blocked. Vehicles had been pushed together across the pavement, stacked and wedged into a rough barricade that extended out into the empty lots on either side. Chain-link fencing had been wired between them, filling the gaps where the vehicles didn't meet. It wasn't pretty, but it was solid. A wall built from whatever was available, sealing off the southern approach completely. But the wall wasn't what held his attention. Behind it, filling the streets and yards and every visible space between the barrier and the buildings beyond, the dead were moving. Hundreds of them, packed together in a slow, shifting mass that drifted in no particular direction. They bumped into each other, pressed against the barricade, filled every gap and opening like water settling into the lowest ground it could find. Some of them had been there long enough that their clothes had started to fall apart, hanging in strips from gray skin. Others looked more recent, still wearing what they'd died in, shuffling along with the rest. The sheer number of them turned the streets into a single living carpet of movement, and the view beyond them was completely obscured. Whatever was on the other side of that wall of dead, there was no seeing it from here. "Do they have a solid wall up there?" Piper asked from the back seat. "The wall isn't the problem," Atticus said. He handed the binoculars to Madison. She raised them, scanning slowly across the same view, taking her time with it. After a long moment, she lowered them and set them on the dashboard. "Well," she said, "so much for driving up to the front door." Chapter 2. The binoculars passed between them in silence. Atticus handed them to Gideon, who studied the barricade and the mass of creatures behind it for a long moment before passing them back to Piper. She took her time with them, scanning left to right, then back again, before lowering them and staring at the scene with her bare eyes, as if hoping it might look different without magnification. It didn't. The barricade stretched across the road and out into the lots on either side, vehicles and fencing wired together into a continuous wall. Behind it, the dead filled every visible space, hundreds of them pressed together in a slow, aimless current. The sound of them carried faintly across the distance, a low murmur of groaning and shuffling that blended together into something that didn't sound like individual creatures anymore. "If we're going to push through that, I'm going to need a few more throwing stars," Gideon said. "You could have every star in the state, and I don't think it would be enough," Piper said. "Maybe we can find a hang glider, just soar over them." Piper shook her head. "Do you know how to hang glide?" "Trained for 3 weeks with a daredevil in preparation for a role." She let out a sigh, shaking her head again. "Of course you did." "We need a serious plan," Atticus said. "By all means, throw one out," Gideon said. Atticus nodded toward the barricade. "We got the SUV and a long stretch of road. Build up enough speed and punch through the line." "Then what?" Madison said. "The noise will alert the guards and we're caught in between gunfire and zombies." Atticus thought about it for a moment, then nodded. She was right. Punching through the wall would put them in the middle of the horde with no way to move fast enough, and every guard in the area looking their direction. It was a plan that started strong and fell apart 2 seconds after it worked. The silence that followed was the productive kind. 4 people staring at the same problem, turning it over in their heads, looking for the angle that nobody had found yet. "Actually, the SUV isn't a bad idea," Piper said. "We're not driving through them," Madison said. "No, but it can still be useful." Piper motioned for the binoculars again and brought them up, studying the perimeter more carefully this time. She swept past the barricade and traced the fencing that extended beyond it, following the line as it curved away from the road and wrapped around the surrounding blocks. The perimeter was bigger than it had first appeared. It wasn't just a wall across the road. It was a full enclosure, 2 parallel lines of fencing and vehicle barriers ringing a section of town that covered at least 10 square blocks. The outer fence faced outward, keeping the world out. The inner fence faced inward, keeping the town sealed. And between them, packed into a channel no more than 10 or 15 yards wide, the creatures were crammed shoulder to shoulder, filling the gap between the fences like a moat made of dead flesh. Hundreds of them, pressed together, shuffling in the narrow space with nowhere to go. Piper lowered the binoculars. "Where's the school?" "North side of town," Madison said. "Let's get over to it." Atticus and Madison exchanged a glance. Madison shrugged. Atticus didn't see a reason to argue the point. They weren't going to learn anything new from this angle, and if Piper had something working in her head, the best move was to let her chase it. They got back in the SUV and pulled away from the overlook, heading east before looping north to come around the far side of town. Atticus kept the distance wide, staying on back roads that ran through empty farmland well outside the perimeter. Nobody spoke during the drive. The banter from earlier was gone, replaced by the kind of focus that settles in when a plan starts taking shape, even if nobody's said it out loud yet. The drive took them past the eastern edge of McPherson, where they could see the fencing continuing in an unbroken line, the dead visible through the gaps in the barriers like shadows behind frosted glass. The scale of it was something else. Bennett hadn't just penned in a building. He'd penned in a chunk of the town itself, using the dead as a living barrier that no one in their right mind would try to cross. It was efficient in a way that Atticus had to grudgingly respect. No need for walls when you had hundreds of creatures doing the job for you. No patrols to run, no shifts to cover. The dead didn't sleep, didn't complain, and didn't ask for a transfer. They came around to the north side, and Atticus pulled the SUV behind a squat commercial building that sat outside the perimeter, out of view from the school. The building had been some kind of supply store before everything fell apart. Its windows dark and its parking lot empty, except for a few shopping carts that had rolled into the curb. The 4 of them got out and moved to the corner of the building on foot, staying low. From here, the view was different. The school sat at the northern edge of the perimeter, a large 2-story brick building with a flat roof and a flagpole out front that was still flying a sun-bleached flag. The fencing on this side was the same patchwork of chain link and vehicle barriers, But there was a break in the line directly north of the school, a checkpoint. 2 sections of fence were rigged on hinges, designed to swing open and close to allow vehicles through. The gate was unmanned, no guards visible at ground level, just creatures wandering through the checkpoint area, drifting between the fence sections without purpose. Piper took the binoculars and studied the gate for a long time, tracking the movement of the creatures near the checkpoint and checking the fence hinges. Then she shifted her focus to the school itself. The building sat roughly half a mile inside the perimeter, surrounded by open ground, athletic fields, parking lots, the wide empty spaces that every school had around it. Between the gate and the school, there was nothing to hide behind. No cover, no structures, just flat ground and whatever creatures happened to be wandering through it. Anyone crossing that stretch would be visible from the roof of the school the entire way. In the afternoon sun, there wouldn't even be shadows to work with. She shifted the binoculars again, this time to the north side of the school building. A handful of SUVs sat in the parking lot there, lined up near what looked like a service entrance. Guard vehicles, close enough to the building that whoever was running this operation could get to them in a hurry if they needed to. "That's how we're getting in," Piper said, lowering the binoculars. They passed around the group again, each of them taking a turn studying the checkpoint, the open ground, and the school. By the time the binoculars came back to Atticus, everyone had seen the same picture. "Okay, but how do we get through without anybody knowing about it?" Atticus said. "There's a good half-mile of open space between the gate and the school. We're going to be sitting ducks if they have anybody up top that can shoot." "And we have to assume that they do," Piper said. She paused, letting that settle, then continued. "But they're going to have their hands full if we sacrifice the SUV." "Okay, I'll bite. What do you want to do?" "We go back to where we were, rig the SUV to punch through the fence, have the horn blaring, the whole nine." "So, a diversion," Atticus said. "Yep. Get them looking the other way while we move up to the school. If we're lucky, we'll set those zombies loose inside their perimeter." Atticus and Madison shared a look. It wasn't the kind of look that said no. It was the kind that said, "This is thin, and we both know it, but we don't have anything better." "I've heard better ideas," Atticus said. "I've heard worse," Madison said. They both looked at Gideon. "You pay me to slice and dice, not to think," he said. "Sounds like an endorsement to me," Piper said. "One problem, though," Madison said. "How are we getting out?" Piper handed her the binoculars and pointed toward the north side of the school building. Madison looked, finding the row of SUVs in the parking lot. "I figure we're already doing a jailbreak, so what's a little Grand Theft Auto on top of that?" Piper said. Madison lowered the binoculars. "I think it can work. What do you think, Atticus?" Atticus looked at the school one more time without the binoculars. The building, the open ground, the perimeter of dead filling the streets around it. 4 people against all of that. The math was terrible, but the math had been terrible since Ellsworth, and they were still standing. At some point, you stopped waiting for the odds to improve and just worked with what you had. He turned back to the group. Gideon stood with his arms crossed, calm and ready. The same look he'd had before every fight since Atticus had known him. Madison was already running logistics in her head, her eyes moving between the checkpoint and the school like she was mapping the route. Piper waited with the patience of someone who had made her pitch and was content to let the decision come on its own. "Piper, take the SUV back to the breach point," he said. "Rig it up and send it when you're ready." "What do you want me to do after that?" "Find a firing position that gives you a good look at the school, because if this goes to plan, we're going to need some cover. I'll put down anybody that looks in your direction." "All right," Atticus said. "Let's get this done." Chapter 3. The checkpoint gate sat a couple hundred yards ahead of them, visible between 2 low commercial buildings that Atticus, Gideon, and Madison were using for cover. They crouched in the shadow of a loading dock, taking turns with the binoculars. Gideon studied the gate for a long moment, tracing the fence line on either side. The double perimeter was clear from here. The 2 parallel fences ran in both directions, the channel between them packed with creatures pressing against each other in the narrow space. At the gate, the fences had a break in them where vehicles could pass through. An extra panel of chain link sat on the exterior of the outer fence. hinged so it could swing open and push inward through the gap between the two fence lines. "It looks like there's a swinging fence on either side of the gate," Gideon said, handing the binoculars to Atticus. Atticus took a look, working through the mechanics of it in his head. The panel swings out, pushes through the channel, blocks off the zombies on either side, seal the gap, cut the horde out of the equation at the gate. Whatever was left in the middle between the two fence lines would be manageable. "We should be able to pull them out and push them through the opening, sealing off the bulk of the zombies," he said. "What about the ones still in the middle?" Madison asked. "You didn't bring me along just for my looks," Gideon said, and gave Madison a playful wink. She shook her head, but didn't argue the point. Fair enough. If anyone was going to handle a handful of ghouls in a confined space with a sword, it was the man in the white ninja outfit. The radio on Atticus's belt crackled to life. "I'm in position. Are you ready to move?" Piper's voice was steady, all business. "We're good to go whenever you are," Atticus said. "Stand by." Piper clipped the radio to her vest and slung her rifle over her shoulder. She leaned into the open driver's side door of the SUV and checked the setup one more time. A rope ran from the bottom of the steering wheel down to the seat adjustment bar beneath the seat, pulled taut to keep the wheel locked straight. On the seat beside her, she had a stick she'd pulled from a fence post, long enough to reach from the back of the seat to the center of the steering wheel. Simple. Ugly. But it would work if she was fast enough. She looked through the windshield at the stretch of road ahead. The barricade they'd scouted earlier sat at the end of it, the outer fence line visible beyond the stacked vehicles. Behind the fence, the creatures were pressed together in the channel, hundreds of them packed into the narrow space. The horn would get their attention. The SUV coming through the fence would get everyone else's. "Okay, here goes nothing," she said. She placed the stick against the horn and pushed it into position. The horn blared, the sound cutting across the empty road and bouncing off the buildings on either side. She reached down and pulled the transmission into drive, then grabbed the brick from the passenger seat and dropped it onto the gas pedal. The SUV lurched forward, tires grabbing pavement. Piper threw herself out of the driver's side door, hitting the ground hard on her good leg and rolling clear. Pain shot through her bad knee on the landing, but she pushed through it, scrambling to her feet and getting behind the corner of a nearby building. The SUV picked up speed, the engine climbing as the brick held the pedal down. It barreled down the road in a straight line, the horn screaming the entire way. Come on, get through," Piper said, watching from cover. The SUV hit the barricade at speed. The stacked vehicles at the base buckled, and the fence behind them ripped apart, chain link peeling away from the posts as the SUV punched through. Bodies flew as it tore through the creatures packed in the channel, the front end plowing through the horde without slowing down. It cleared the inner fence a second later, crashing through the second barrier and out the other side into the open street beyond. "Hell yeah," Piper said. The SUV carried on for another half block past the perimeter, the horn still blaring, before a zombie wedged under the front wheel, caught the axle, and dragged the vehicle hard to the right. It jumped the curb and slammed into the side of a brick building, the engine revving against the brick for a few seconds before the horn finally cut out. Steam rose from the crumpled hood. Piper grabbed the radio. Perimeter breached. "Copy that. We're on the move," Atticus said into the radio, already rising from behind the loading dock. He led the three of them out from cover, moving fast across the open ground toward the checkpoint gate. The distance closed quickly, their boots hitting the pavement in a steady rhythm. Atticus kept his eyes on the school in the distance, watching for movement on the roof. Nothing. No guards visible, no reaction at all. The crash on the southeast side had pulled their attention exactly where Piper wanted it. They reached the outer fence and took a knee, pressing against the chain link. On the other side, the creatures in the channel were agitated, pressing toward the southeast, where the noise had come from. The bodies nearest to the gate shifted and bumped against the fence, groaning, but their attention was split. The SUV's crash had given them something to focus on, and most of them were drifting that direction. Atticus waited, watching the roofline of the school through the gaps in the fence. Several seconds passed. No movement, no gunfire. "Let's get that entrance open," he said. Atticus moved to one side of the gate, and Madison took the other. The extra panels on the exterior of the fence were hinged with heavy bolts, rusted but functional. Atticus pulled the pin on his side and swung the panel outward, then pushed it through the gap between the two fence lines. The chain link scraped against the posts as it swung into the channel, cutting across the space and blocking the creatures on that side from reaching the gate opening. Madison did the same on her side, the second panel pushing through and sealing off the channel in the other direction. The bulk of the horde was cut off. The panels weren't pretty, but they filled the gap well enough that the creatures on either side couldn't push through. They pressed against the chain link, fingers curling through the gaps, but the panels held. That left the ones caught in the middle, 8 of them, trapped in the section of the channel between the 2 panels, stumbling over each other as they turned toward the noise of the fence being moved. Gideon didn't wait. He positioned himself at the gate, feet set, and thrust his sword through the gaps in the chain link. The blade punched through the skull of the nearest creature, and it dropped. He pulled the blade back, adjusted his angle, and drove it through the next one. Methodical, efficient, each thrust finding its mark. The creatures pressed toward him, which only made the work easier. They pushed their faces into the fence, and he put them down one at a time. By the time Atticus and Madison had the panel secured, Gideon had put down 2 through the fence. He reached down and unlatched the gate, pulling it open. 6 ghouls still stood on the other side. They turned toward the movement of the gate, dead eyes locking onto him, and came forward in a staggered wave. Gideon stepped through the opening to meet them. The first one reached for him, and he sidestepped, bringing the katana across in a flat arc that took its head clean off. The body kept moving for half a step before it crumpled. The second was right behind it, stumbling over the falling corpse, and Gideon drove the blade straight through its forehead before it could recover. 2 more came at him from the left, close enough that they were nearly shoulder to shoulder. He spun away from the first one's outstretched hands and brought the sword around in a wide backhand slash that caught both of them across the neck. One dropped immediately. The other staggered sideways, half its throat gone, and Gideon finished it with a quick downward thrust. The 5th ghoul grabbed at his sleeve. Gideon yanked his arm free, reversed the blade, and stabbed backward without looking. The point found the creature's eye socket and it went limp, sliding off the steel and hitting the pavement. The last one was the biggest, a large creature that stood at least 6 feet tall. It lurched toward him with its arms wide. Gideon planted his feet, waited until it was in range, and swung the katana in a rising cut that started at the hip and ended above his head. The blade split the creature's skull from jaw to crown, and it dropped in 2 directions at once. "It doesn't matter how big you are, you'll all fall to my blade," Gideon said with a smirk. He flicked the blade clean and looked back at Atticus and Madison, who were standing at the gate watching him. "Come on, let's move," he said, stepping over the bodies. The 3 of them ran. Hard, open ground, half a mile of nothing between them and the school. The afternoon sun was directly overhead, and there wasn't a scrap of cover anywhere on the stretch. Athletic fields on the left, an empty parking lot on the right, and the 2-story brick school building growing larger with every stride. Madison ran with her rifle up, the stock against her shoulder, scanning the roofline as she moved. If someone appeared up there with a weapon, she wanted to be the first one shooting. Atticus focused on the door ahead, a side entrance on the ground floor that was getting closer with every step. Gideon ran beside them with his katana in hand, not looking at the school, not looking at the ground, just running and letting the energy build for whatever was on the other side of that door. They were halfway across when the sound of gunfire erupted in the distance, not aimed at them, coming from the southeast near the breach point. Short bursts, the sharp crack of rifles, followed by more sustained fire. "Looks like they took the bait," Atticus said between breaths. They kept running. The school wall came up fast, and they pressed their backs against the brick, catching their breath in the narrow shadow of the building. Atticus moved to the side entrance and tried the handle. Locked. He pulled a knife from his belt and worked the edge into the gap between the door and the frame, putting pressure on the latch. It took a few seconds of prying before the mechanism gave way, and the door popped open an inch. He cracked it wider and looked inside. An empty hallway stretched ahead of them, fluorescent lights off, sunlight coming through windows at the far end. Classroom doors on both sides, all of them closed. No sound except the faint echo of the gunfire outside, filtering through the walls. Atticus looked back at the other 2. Madison had her rifle ready. Gideon's grip on the katana had shifted from running to fighting, the blade angled forward. "All right," Atticus said, "let's go find our girl." Chapter 4. Atticus held the door open an inch, listening. The hallway beyond was quiet. No footsteps, no voices, just the faint hum of a building that hadn't had its power cut but didn't have much running either. He looked back at Madison, who had her rifle up and ready, and Gideon, who stood just behind her with his blade angled forward. "Open it," Madison said. Atticus pulled the door wide. Madison went through first, sweeping the rifle left and right as she cleared the entrance. Gideon followed close behind, moving silently, but ready to strike. Atticus came in last, easing the door shut behind them. The hallway stretched ahead in both directions, long and straight, the kind of corridor that every school in America seemed to share. Linoleum floors, metal lockers lining the walls, corkboard displays that still had papers pinned to them. The overhead lights were off, and the only illumination came from thin beams of afternoon sun, slanting through the windows in the classroom doors. The light cut across the hallway in angled strips, leaving most of the space in a gray half-dark that made distances hard to judge. The smell hit them a few steps in, sweat and confinement, and something stale underneath it. The air was thick with it, the kind of smell that came from too many people in too small a space for too long. Madison moved up to the first classroom door and looked through the window. Empty. Desks still arranged in rows, a whiteboard with notes still written on it. She gave a short nod and kept moving. They worked their way up the hallway in silence, passing door after door. Each classroom was the same. Empty, untouched, frozen in whatever moment the school had been abandoned. A backpack still hanging from a chair. A stack of textbooks on a teacher's desk. A poster about the periodic table peeling away from the wall above a row of windows. The small details of a normal day that never got cleaned up because the next day never came. The hallway felt longer than it should have. Every door was another corner to check, another window to glance through, another few seconds of exposure in a building they didn't know the layout of. Madison set the pace, moving from door to door with the rifle up, checking each room before advancing. Atticus stayed a step behind her on the opposite side of the hall, watching the doors she wasn't covering. Gideon brought up the rear, his attention split between the hallway ahead and the one they had already cleared behind them. They reached the first connecting hallway, a corridor that branched off to the left, toward another wing of the building. Madison eased up to the corner and started to lean around it when she heard something, a voice not far off, and the tinny crackle of a radio. She pulled back quickly, nearly bumping into Gideon, and held up a fist. The three of them pressed against the wall and listened. The radio crackled again, the voice coming through it too low and distorted to make out the words, but the guard holding it was close enough to hear clearly. "Things at the school are quiet," the guard said. The radio fired back. Someone on the other end was yelling, the tone sharp and angry, but the words were still too muffled to understand. "Okay, fine. I'll do another sweep," the guard said. More yelling came through the radio before the guard cut it off. The hallway went quiet for a beat, and then the guard's voice came again, lower this time, talking to himself. "Miserable son of a bitch. Who is going to be stupid enough to try and come here?" He kept muttering as his footsteps started up, heading in their direction. The sound grew louder with each step, boots on linoleum, steady and unhurried, the walk of a man doing a job he thought was pointless. He was maybe 5 yards from the corner when another voice called out from somewhere behind him, further down the connecting hall. "Where are you going?" the other guard called out. The footsteps stopped. "The boss wants me to do a sweep," the guard said. "Well, hurry it up. We're short-handed at the front," the other guard said. The guard gave what sounded like a half-hearted acknowledgement, and then the footsteps started again, coming closer. Atticus and Gideon exchanged a glance. Madison adjusted her grip on the rifle and shifted her position so she was square to the corner, the barrel level with where the guard's head would be when he turned. The guard came around the corner, and Madison pressed the barrel of the rifle into his cheek. "You might want to stay quiet if you want to live," she said. Her voice was calm, collected, yet terrifying if you were on the receiving end of it. "Just nod yes or no. Do you understand?" The guard nodded. He was young, mid-20s at most, with a patchy beard and wide eyes that were doing the math on how badly his day had just gone. "Good. I'm going to take your weapon, and you're not going to move, or else you're going to lose your head. You understand?" He nodded again. Madison reached for the sidearm on his belt, and as her hand closed around the grip, the other guard's voice echoed down the hallway behind him. "Come on, man, what are you doing?" the other guard called out. Footsteps, coming their way. Not fast, but not slow either. Atticus and Gideon shared a worried look. One guard they could handle quietly. Two was a different problem, especially if the second one saw something and started yelling. "Tell him you see something," Madison said. The guard gave her a confused look. So did Atticus and Gideon. "Do it now," she said. The guard swallowed and called out over his shoulder. "Hey, get up here. I think I see something." The other guard let out a string of muttered curses, and the footsteps picked up. "I swear to God I'm gonna whoop your ass if you're wasting my time," the other guard said. Gideon listened to the footsteps, tracking the distance by sound. The second guard was moving fast now, boots slapping the linoleum, closing the gap in a hurry. Gideon shifted the katana to his left hand and reached into his vest with his right, pulling out a ninja star. He held it between his fingers, his body still, his breathing steady, waiting for the sound to tell him the moment was right. The footsteps got within a few yards of the corner. Gideon stepped out from behind the wall and threw the star in one fluid motion. It covered the distance in less than a second, spinning once before it buried itself in the guard's neck. The man's eyes went wide and his hands came up to the wound, but his legs were already giving out. He hit the floor hard, tried to say something, and went still. Madison grabbed the first guard by his vest and yanked him back behind the wall while Atticus and Gideon rushed out to grab the body. They dragged it around the corner and out of the sight line of the connecting hallway, leaving it against the wall beside the lockers. Madison pressed the guard against the wall, her face close to his. "Unless you want that to be you, you're going to tell me what I want to know," Madison said. "I'll tell you whatever you want to know," the guard said. His voice was shaking. "I'm looking for my friend Connie, and I know she's here," Madison said. "I just need you to tell me where." "I have no idea who that is," the guard said. "It's not like we're chatting up the prisoners. There can't be too many women here. She would have been brought here in the last week or so." "They're moving people in and out all the time, usually when I'm off duty," he said. "You're not really doing yourself any favors," Madison said. "What do you want from me?" "Tell me where my friend is." The guard's eyes darted between Madison and the rifle, working through his options and not finding any good ones. "Is she valuable?" he asked. To Captain Bennett. "Is she valuable to him?" "Yeah, she is," Madison said. "Then she's most likely in the main gymnasium." "Where is that?" "Straight down this hallway, hang a left, and it's on the other side of the building," the guard said. "How many guards are watching over it?" Madison asked. "There's usually 10 of us in the building, but I don't know how many are here now. Something was going down at the perimeter, which you probably already know." The guard's radio crackled to life on its own. A different voice came through, clearer this time. "The perimeter has been secured. No sign of the driver. All units on high alert." Madison looked at the radio, then back at the guard. "Let me guess. They're going to be back here soon?" Madison asked. "That would be my guess," the guard said. Atticus and Gideon returned from moving the body. Atticus read the situation in Madison's face and didn't waste time. "What are we looking at?" Atticus asked. "She's most likely in the gym, and our diversion has run its course," Madison said. "Then we better get a move on," Atticus said. "What about our friend here?" Gideon raised the blade slightly, angling it toward the guard. The guard's face went white, and he pressed himself harder against the wall, his hands coming up instinctively. "Come on, I didn't ask for this post," the guard said, his voice cracking. "I was told I was coming here, and it was my choice if I wanted to be a guard or locked up." "It's your call, Madison," Atticus said. Madison looked the guard in the eye. He held the look, breathing hard, his whole body tense with the effort of staying still. "Don't make me regret this," she said. She flipped the rifle around and slammed the stock into his face. His head snapped back against the wall, and he slid down the lockers, out cold before he hit the floor. Madison turned back to the hallway, bringing the rifle up to her shoulder. "Come on, let's get Connie." Chapter 5. Madison moved down the hallway with her rifle raised, her steps quick and deliberate. The barrel stayed level, tracking ahead of her as she covered the distance in long strides. There was no hesitation in the way she moved now, no pausing at doors or checking corners, with the slow caution they had used on the way in. The clock was running, and she could feel it. Atticus and Gideon kept pace behind her, matching her speed but watching the tension building in her shoulders. She was locked in, Her focus narrowed to a single point somewhere ahead of them, where Connie was waiting. Everything else had fallen away. She turned the corner without slowing, rounding it with the rifle up and sweeping the new hallway in one motion before continuing forward. "Slow down a step," Atticus said. "We don't have the time," Madison said. Gideon reached forward and put his hand on her shoulder. She flinched at the contact, spinning slightly before catching herself. Gideon held the grip, steady and firm, until she met his eyes. "We'll get her, but getting ourselves killed isn't going to help her," Gideon said. Madison held his look for a moment, then nodded. He was right, and she knew it. Running headlong through an unknown building, with guards still unaccounted for, was a good way to walk into something they couldn't walk out of. She eased the pace back a step, still moving with purpose, but no longer outrunning her own awareness. They continued down the hall, passing more closed classroom doors, more dark windows, until they reached the next intersection, where a wider corridor crossed their path. Madison stopped at the corner and leaned around it, expecting to see guards posted outside the gymnasium. Rifles, body armor, some kind of defensive setup for the most important room in the building. There was nothing. The hallway was empty. The double doors to the gym sat 50 feet ahead, with no one standing in front of them. She stepped back behind cover. "I don't like it," Madison said. "Too many of them?" Atticus asked. "Not enough of them." Atticus took his own look around the corner, studying the empty hallway and the unguarded doors. After a few seconds, he came back behind cover, his expression confirming what Madison was already thinking. "Yeah, I don't like it either," he said. "Do you think it's a trap?" Madison asked. "Most likely. But do we really have a choice?" Madison shook her head. They didn't. Whatever was waiting on the other side of those doors, Connie was in there too. That was the only thing that mattered right now. She moved them out from cover, keeping the pace brisk as they crossed the distance to the gym. Their footsteps echoed off the linoleum in the empty hallway, louder than any of them wanted. Madison reached the double doors first and nodded to Gideon. He moved up and pulled on the handle. The door opened without resistance, unlocked. The three of them looked inside. The gymnasium was lit up, the overhead fluorescent panels bright and humming, a harsh contrast to the dark hallways they'd been moving through. The court stretched out ahead of them, a full-size basketball floor with painted lines and a scoreboard mounted on the far wall that still showed zeros. But the court wasn't being used for basketball. Tall chain-link pens had been constructed across the floor, dozens of them arranged in rows like kennel cages at an animal shelter. Each pen was roughly 8 feet square, topped with more chain link to prevent climbing, with padlocked doors on the front. Gideon could see people inside them, figures sitting or lying on the floor, but from the doorway he couldn't get an accurate count. "There's people," Gideon said. "Stay here and watch the door," Madison said. "Atticus, cover the exterior door. I'm going to find Connie." Both men nodded. Gideon pulled the gym door open wider, and the three of them slipped inside. Atticus broke off immediately, moving along the outer wall toward the exterior doors on the far side. He reached the nearest one and looked through the small, reinforced window, scanning the parking lot and the open ground beyond it. No guards visible, no movement at all. "I really don't like this," Atticus said quietly. Madison moved down the first row of cages, 2 people in each one, sitting on the concrete floor or leaning against the chain link. No cots, no bedding, except for thin emergency blankets, the silver kind that crinkled when they moved. A plastic bucket sat in the corner of each cage. The first prisoners she passed were in bad shape, malnourished, thin, their skin hanging loose on frames that had lost too much weight too quickly. Some of them looked up as she passed. Others didn't move at all, staring at nothing, with the hollow expression of people who had stopped expecting anything to change. The smell was worse in here than it had been in the hallway, concentrated by the closed space and the fluorescent heat. Sweat and waste and the sour edge of bodies that hadn't been properly fed or cleaned in weeks. Madison kept moving, checking each cage, looking for Connie's face among the strangers. She passed cage after cage, row after row, and every face she saw was someone she didn't recognize. Some of them reached toward her through the chain link, fingers curling through the gaps, mouths forming words they didn't have the energy to speak. She wanted to stop. She wanted to open every lock in the room, but the clock was still running, and she couldn't save everyone until she found the one person she'd come for. She reached the end of the second row without finding her. The gym was larger than she'd expected, the rows of cages extending further back than she could see from the entrance. She was running out of time and patience in equal measure. "Connie!" Madison called out, her voice echoing off the gymnasium walls. "Connie!" She held her breath, listening. For a terrible second, there was nothing. Then a voice came back from across the room, hoarse but unmistakable. "Madison?" Madison looked through the rows of chain-link fencing, scanning the far corner of the gym. She spotted her in the last cage on the back wall, a figure standing up and pressing against the chain-link with both hands. Even from this distance, she could tell Connie was thinner than the last time she'd seen her, but she was standing, and she was alive, and her voice had the edge of someone who was angry rather than broken. Madison ran around the end of the row and down the last aisle, weaving between the cages until she reached the far corner. Connie was gripping the chain link with both hands, her knuckles white, her eyes wide. "What in the hell are you doing here?" Connie asked. "You didn't think I'd leave you to rot here, did you?" Madison said. How did you find me?" "There will be time for that, but right now, we need to get out of here." Madison turned her attention to the cage door. A heavy padlock held the latch in place, a simple mechanism that wasn't designed for security as much as convenience. She flipped her rifle around and drove the stock into the padlock. It took 2 hits before the shackle gave way, and the lock dropped to the floor. She yanked the cage door open and pulled Connie into a hug. Connie held on for a moment, her hands gripping the back of Madison's vest, her body trembling with something that was equal parts relief and rage. Then she let go, standing back, composing herself with the speed of someone who had learned a long time ago that falling apart was a luxury she couldn't afford. The hug lasted 2 seconds before a gunshot shattered the moment. Atticus fired a single round through the exterior door, the crack of the rifle echoing through the gymnasium and sending every prisoner in the cages ducking for cover. A beat later, return fire came hammering back, rounds punching into the brick wall around the doorframe and shattering one of the small windows. "Everybody stay down!" Atticus yelled. He pulled back from the door and ran across the gym toward Madison and Connie, keeping low as another burst of gunfire tore through the exterior door, sending splinters of wood and metal skittering across the court. "We have to go," Atticus said. Connie's eyes met his. She gave him a short nod, but there was something behind it, a look that said she had things to say and questions to ask, and none of it was going to be pleasant. But not now. Now was about moving. Atticus pushed them toward the interior doors, then turned and fired twice more toward the exterior entrance as one of them began to swing open. The shots drove whoever was on the other side back, and the door slammed shut again. It wouldn't hold them for long. The 3 of them rushed across the gym to the hallway door where Gideon was waiting, his katana in one hand and his body pressed against the wall beside the frame. "Are we clear?" Madison asked. "I think so," Gideon said. He made eye contact with Connie. She looked at him for a beat, clearly confused by the man in the white ninja outfit holding a sword, but she shook it off and gave him a nod. He was here to help. That was enough for now. "Come on, we have to go," Madison said. "What about the other prisoners?" Atticus asked, glancing back toward the rows of cages. "Most of them are too weak to move," Connie said. "Damn it," Atticus said. He looked back at the gymnasium one more time, his jaw tight. Rows of cages, dozens of people, and he was about to walk away from all of them. He knew it wasn't right, but he also knew that they didn't have a choice. He shook his head and turned back to the hallway. The 4 of them broke into a run, heading back the way they'd come. The hallway was still clear, the dark corridors echoing with their footsteps as they covered the distance at a full sprint. Atticus brought up the rear, his rifle pointed behind them, ready to turn and fire at the first sign of pursuit. They reached the connecting hallway and turned hard, running down the next corridor. Connie stumbled halfway through, her legs failing to keep up with the pace her mind was demanding. Days of poor food and confinement had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit. Her foot caught and she pitched forward, nearly hitting the floor before Madison grabbed her arm and hauled her upright. "I got you," Madison said. Connie steadied herself and kept moving, her hand gripping Madison's arm for a few more steps before she found her rhythm again. They weren't far now. One more turn, and they'd be at the exterior door they'd come in through. They came around the final corner, and Madison brought her rifle up, ready to shoot. The hallway was empty, but the unconscious guard she'd left against the lockers was gone. A smear of blood on the linoleum where his face had hit the floor was the only sign he'd been there at all. "That's not good," Madison said. They moved up to the exterior door and stopped. Atticus stepped forward, his hand on the push bar. "The SUVs are 50 yards to the left," he said. "We get out there and haul ass to them. I'm driving." The other three nodded. Atticus pushed the door open and stepped through. He froze. Zombies. Dozens of them, shambling across the open ground from the direction of the fence line. A wall of dead bodies closing the distance in a slow, steady wave. They were 30 yards out and getting closer. Too many to fight through and too close to ignore. "What the hell?" Atticus said. A shot rang out from the fence line, the round pinging off the metal door inches from his head. Atticus threw himself backward through the doorway, hitting the floor hard as a second shot cracked off the brick wall outside. "Are you okay? Are you hit?" Gideon asked, reaching down. "No, I'm good," Atticus said. Gideon grabbed his arm and pulled him to his feet. Atticus brushed himself off, his ears still ringing from the shot that had nearly found him. The four of them stood in the hallway, the door swinging shut in front of them, cutting off the view of the approaching horde. Before anyone could speak, a radio crackled to life. It was coming from the corner of the hallway, sitting on a window ledge where the missing guard must have left it. The voice that came through was calm, controlled, and entirely unimpressed. "I don't know who you are, but I can guarantee you one thing. You made a mistake by coming here." Chapter 6. The four of them stood in the hallway with the door shut in front of them, and the sounds of the dead getting louder on the other side. The groaning had been faint when they'd first pulled back inside, something you could almost convince yourself was far enough away to ignore. It wasn't faint anymore. The shuffling of feet, the low, constant moan of dozens of creatures pressing closer, all of it building into a wall of noise that said time was running out. "We can't stay here," Connie said. "Atticus, did you see any vehicles outside the gym?" Madison asked. Atticus shook his head. "The ones outside here are the only ones I've seen." "Can we get out on foot?" Connie asked. "With the way you're moving right now, absolutely not," Madison said. "Do you not have backup?" "Piper," Madison said. "That's it?" Connie asked. "It's been a day," Gideon said. Connie stared at him for a moment. Her eyes moved from the white ninja outfit to the sword to the throwing stars visible in his vest, and something behind her expression suggested she had a great deal to say about all of it. She shook it off. There would be time for that later, assuming there was a later. "Let me see if I can get her," Atticus said. He grabbed the radio from his belt and clicked it on. "Piper, do you copy?" "I copy," Piper's voice came back. "What's your 20? "I'm moving up into position. It's just taking me a minute." "You need to hurry. We're in trouble," Atticus said. "How bad?" "We got 100 zombies bearing down on us, and at least one shooter aimed at us." "I'm picking up the pace. Stand by," Piper said. Atticus clipped the radio back on his belt and looked at the others. Piper was coming, but not fast enough, and the creatures outside were getting closer by the second. "Even if she gets into position, she doesn't have enough bullets to cover us," Madison said. "There's hundreds of those things out there, not to mention shooters." "We can fortify the school," Atticus said. "Hope that there's a weapons cache and some prisoners strong enough to fight." Connie shook her head. "They'll have reinforcements here in an hour, and knowing Bennett, he'd rather burn this place to the ground than let his prisoners run the asylum." The hallway went quiet after that. Not the productive kind of quiet where people are thinking through options. The bad kind, where everyone has already thought through the options and come up empty. Gideon broke the silence. "Then we go get a car," he said. "Connie can't move that fast," Madison said. "We'll be sitting ducks out there." "Then I go get a car." The four of them looked at each other. Atticus wanted to argue but couldn't find the angle. Madison wanted a better plan but didn't have one. Connie didn't know Gideon well enough to judge whether he was serious or insane, and the outfit wasn't helping her figure it out. "What do you need from us?" Madison asked. "I just need you to hold their attention so I can get outside," Gideon said. "They're going to shoot anybody who steps through that door," Madison said, "which is why I'm going through the window." Gideon turned and moved down the hall to the closest classroom, kicking the door open without breaking stride. Before he disappeared inside, Atticus called after him. What if there aren't keys in there? Gideon stopped in the doorway and looked back. Dusk Runners, 1996, I think. Went direct to DVD, but I was a master car thief. I took my training very seriously. He gave Atticus a wink. Atticus let out a laugh despite everything, shaking his head. Start shooting in 30 seconds, Gideon said. Madison nodded and moved into position by the exterior door, pressing her back against the wall beside the frame with her rifle ready. She'd cracked the door just enough to fire a few rounds and draw every eye on the outside toward her position. It didn't need to work for long, just long enough. Connie moved up beside Atticus, watching Gideon disappear into the classroom. She looked over at Atticus with an expression that was equal parts confusion and disbelief. "Who in the hell is that, and where did you find him?" Connie asked. Atticus could only laugh again, shaking his head. "I'll explain later." Inside the classroom, Gideon moved between the rows of desks to the windows along the outer wall. He found the one he wanted, a window facing the north side of the building, and looked out. The zombies were close, within 10 yards of the building, and focused on the exterior door where the team had tried to exit earlier. They were packed together, dozens of them shuffling forward in a slow tide, their bodies bumping against each other as they pressed toward the entrance. Beyond the horde, 50 yards to the left, the SUVs sat in the parking lot where they'd spotted them through the binoculars. 3 vehicles lined up near the service entrance, waiting for someone with the nerve to get to them. Between Gideon and the SUVs, there was nothing but open ground and dead bodies that wanted to eat him. The shooter at the fence line had a clear line of sight to the building, however. With the way the vehicles were parked, it meant the SUVs furthest from the building would block the sight line to the ones closest to it if he could just get to it. Gideon counted in his head. 25, 26. He unlatched the window and eased it up, the frame sliding with a faint scrape that made him hold his breath. None of the creatures turned. Their attention was locked on the door. 28, 29. A gunshot cracked from the front of the building, then another. Madison doing her part. The response came immediately, rifles firing from the fence line, rounds hammering into the brick and the metal door frame. Every zombie in the area turned toward the sound, groaning, pressing harder toward the entrance. Gideon went. He pulled himself through the window and dropped to the ground outside, landing in a crouch. The nearest creature was 5 yards to his left, its back to him, shuffling toward the gunfire. He rose to his feet and ran. The first zombie he hit never saw him coming. It was standing sideways in his path, and he took it out with a single slash across the back of the skull as he passed, not breaking stride. The second one turned at the sound and reached for him, but Gideon was already past it, the katana catching it across the temple on the follow-through. He was 20 yards from the SUVs when the shooter spotted him. A round cracked past his head, close enough that he felt the air move, and he ducked low, cutting to the right. The zombies around him were still focused on the gunfire at the door, which meant they were between him and the fence line. He stayed low and moved behind them, using the wall of dead bodies as cover. Another shot came in and hit a creature 3 feet to his left, dropping it. Gideon kept moving, weaving between the ghouls, staying close enough that the shooter couldn't get a clean line on him without hitting his own zombie perimeter. A creature stumbled into his path, close enough to grab. Gideon dropped low and slashed across its legs at the knees. It collapsed forward, clearing the way. He stepped over it and kept running. 2 more blocked his route to the nearest SUV, packed tightly together and turning toward him with outstretched arms. He cut the legs out from under the first and drove the katana through the forehead of the second in the same motion, pulling the blade free as the body fell. Another round snapped off the pavement behind his heel. The shooter was adjusting, trying to track him through the gaps in the crowd. Gideon put 2 more zombies between himself and the fence line and sprinted the last 10 yards to the SUVs. He reached the one closest to the building and pulled the driver's door open, throwing himself inside. The 2 SUVs beside it were parked between him and the shooter's position, blocking the sight line. For the moment, he was covered. "Come on, let there be keys," Gideon said. He checked the cup holder, empty, the dashboard tray. Nothing. He reached up and flipped the sun visor down. A set of keys dropped into his hand. "Oh, thank God," he said. He jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine caught on the first try, roaring to life. For a vehicle that had been sitting in a parking lot outside a zombie prison, it sounded like the best thing Gideon had ever heard. He threw it into drive and hit the gas, staying low in the seat with his head barely above the dashboard. The SUV surged forward, tires barking on the pavement. He cut the wheel toward the school entrance, the front end plowing through the zombies that were still crowded around the door. Bodies bounced off the grill and tumbled aside, the impact shuddering through the frame. He slammed the brakes directly in front of the exterior door, the SUV skidding to a stop, close enough that someone could step out of the building and into the vehicle in 2 strides. A bullet ripped through the driver's side window, shattering it. Glass sprayed across the dashboard, and Gideon ducked lower. "Get your asses in here!" he yelled toward the door. Nothing happened. The door stayed shut. "Atticus, we have to go!" Gideon shouted. Another shot punched through the rear window, the round passing through the cabin and embedding in the passenger side panel. Gideon pressed himself flat across the center console, making himself as small as possible. Then a different gunshot rang out, not from the fence line. From somewhere further away, a single clean crack that sounded nothing like the rifles that had been firing at him. A beat of silence followed, then nothing. The shooting from the fence stopped. The school door swung open and Atticus came through first, his rifle up and scanning as he moved. Connie came right behind him, with Madison bringing up the rear, walking backward with her rifle aimed at the hallway they'd just left. The 3 of them piled into the SUV, Connie and Madison in the back, Atticus in the passenger seat. "Go, go, go," Madison said. "What about the shooter?" Gideon asked. "Piper took him out. Now drive," Madison said. Gideon hit the gas. The SUV launched forward, the front end catching 2 more zombies and sending them spinning off to the side. He aimed for the checkpoint gate, the same opening they'd come through less than an hour ago, and blew through it without slowing down. He cut the wheel hard to the right once they were through, tires squealing as the vehicle fishtailed onto the road. 1 block north, he spotted Piper standing in front of a low commercial building, waving them down with her rifle in one hand. She'd made the move from her firing position to the pickup point without needing to be told. Gideon slammed the brakes and the SUV skidded to a stop beside her. Piper yanked the back door open and threw herself in beside Connie and Madison. "Hang on, we're moving," Gideon said. He slammed the gas and the SUV roared forward, the engine climbing as they put distance between themselves and McPherson. The town shrank in the rearview mirror, the school and the fences and the dead, all blending together into a single dark smudge on the Kansas horizon. Chapter 7. Gideon drove fast and without a plan, which was exactly the point. He turned down side roads at random, cutting through empty intersections and looping back on routes they had already passed, putting distance between them and McPherson in a pattern that would be impossible to follow. Every few minutes he'd check the mirrors, watching for headlights or dust clouds or anything that suggested pursuit. There was nothing. Just empty Kansas roads stretching out behind them under the afternoon sun. Nobody spoke for the first several miles. The adrenaline from the school was wearing off, leaving behind the heavy quiet of people processing what they'd just done and what they'd failed to do. The prisoners were still in those cages, dozens of them, locked in a gymnasium with no food worth eating and guards who would be back any minute. That knowledge sat in the vehicle like something with weight, pressing down on all of them. Connie sat in the back seat between Madison and Piper, her hands resting on her knees. She was still wearing what they'd taken her in, a shirt that was too thin for the weather and pants that hung loose on a frame that had dropped too much weight too fast. The bruise along her jawline had turned yellow at the edges, older than the ones on her wrists, which were still dark. She stared straight ahead, her expression flat, the kind of stillness that came from a person holding everything in until they decided it was safe to let it out. "So, does anybody know where we're going?" Gideon asked. "Yeah, head north another few miles, then head east," Madison said. "Where are we going?" Atticus asked. "Head towards Tampa. There's a wind farm just north of the town. I got a safe house there." "Are we sure it's still standing?" Gideon asked. Madison hesitated before answering. "As of a week ago, yeah, it's still standing. Bennett's people have found a few of them, but Cook has alerted me to the ones they've found. This one hasn't been on the list." "It's not like we have better options," Piper said from the back seat. "All right, heading to the wind farm," Gideon said. The rest of the drive was quiet, almost uncomfortable. The silence had a different texture now than it had on the way into McPherson. On the way in, It had been the silence of people preparing for something. This was the silence of people carrying something they couldn't put down. The prisoners, the fight, and the complete lack of information about what had happened with Buck's group at Lindsborg. They'd sent people into a diversion so this mission could happen, and they had no idea what it had cost. It took the better part of a half hour to find their way to the spot. The wind farm appeared first, a row of turbines standing motionless against the sky like enormous white crosses. They hadn't turned in weeks, maybe longer, their blades frozen at odd angles. Below them, a small service building sat at the end of a gravel access road, a flat-roofed concrete structure that looked like it had been built to house electrical equipment and nothing else. Unremarkable. Forgettable. Exactly the kind of place you'd pick if you didn't want anyone looking twice at it. A faded sign near the entrance read something about authorized personnel, but the letters had peeled away enough that the warning had lost its authority. Atticus and Madison both had their hands on their weapons as they approached. The gravel crunched under the tires loud enough to announce their arrival to anyone within 100 yards, which put both of them on edge. Atticus scanned the tree line while Madison watched the building itself, looking for signs that someone had been there recently. Fresh tire tracks, disturbed ground, anything out of place. There was nothing. As soon as Gideon parked, Atticus and Madison got out and swept the area, moving in opposite directions around the building before meeting on the far side. When they came back around, Madison's shoulders had dropped a fraction. "We're clear," Madison said. "Gideon, park behind the building." Gideon nodded and pulled the SUV around once everyone was out, tucking it behind the structure where it wouldn't be visible from the access road. Madison walked to the front door and crouched down, reaching for a rock near the foundation. She flipped it over and pulled a key from the dirt underneath. "That's some next-level security there," Atticus said. "I figured if they wanted to get in bad enough, they would," Madison said. Atticus chuckled as she unlocked the door and pushed it open. The interior was exactly what the exterior promised: sparse, functional, and not designed for comfort. A single room with concrete walls, a table in the center, and a few folding chairs stacked against the wall. A small canvas bag of weapons sat on the table, zipped closed. Maps had been pinned to one wall, some of them marked with routes and positions in pencil. A military radio sat in the far corner on a metal shelf, its antenna cable running up through a hole in the ceiling. Madison hit the lights. A pair of fluorescent tubes buzzed to life overhead, filling the room with a flat bluish glow. "There's a cooler underneath the table there," Madison said. "Should be some water and protein bars." "What about a med kit?" Piper asked. Madison nodded, walking over to a folding table against the wall. She reached into a box underneath and pulled out a small first aid kit, tossing it across to Piper. Piper caught it one-handed and walked over to Connie, ready to tend to her wounds as best she could. Gideon came through the door last, shutting it behind him. The windows in the building, small and narrow, had been blacked out with paint or tape, keeping any light inside from being visible from the outside. "The SUV is out of sight, at least from the road," Gideon said. "If they come from the field, there's not much I can do." "We should be good here," Madison said. "The bulk of Bennett's force in the area is down in Hillsborough because of the proximity to the reservoir." "It sounds like Bennett is planning for the long haul," Atticus said. "Yeah, but it's coming at a hell of a cost for the people who live here," Connie said. Atticus nodded in agreement. There was nothing to add to that. They'd seen the cost firsthand in those cages. Madison walked over to the radio and powered it up. The unit hummed as it warmed, a small green light blinking on the front panel. The rest of the group gathered around it, standing in a loose semicircle. "It's going to take me a minute to get dialed in," Madison said. She adjusted the frequency dial, working through the band slowly until she found the one she was looking for. She clicked the talk button. "Ingrid, do you copy?" Static. The room was quiet enough that the hiss from the speaker filled every corner of it. A long pause stretched out, 5 seconds, then 10. Long enough that Madison's finger moved toward the button to try again. Then the line kicked up. "Madison, it's good to hear your voice. Where the hell are you?" Ingrid said. "We're somewhere safe. How's everything down there?" Another long pause, longer than the first one, and the quality of the silence was different. It wasn't a signal issue, it was hesitation. "Ingrid," Madison said. "The diversion worked," Ingrid said. The strike team didn't make it to Ellsworth. That's good to hear, Madison said. But it came at a cost. Ingrid's voice dropped slightly. Sasha, she didn't make it. The room went still. Madison closed her eyes. Piper stopped working on Connie and looked up. Atticus stared at the floor, his jaw tight. Gideon was the only one who didn't move, standing with his arms folded and his eyes on the radio, processing it the way he processed everything, quietly and behind a wall that didn't crack easily. Jesus, Madison said. I'm so sorry. Meat's pretty broken up about it, Ingrid said. I'm pretty sure Buck will be too, once he wakes up. What happened to Buck? Madison asked. He took a round in the shoulder, lost a lot of blood, but a nurse in town managed to stabilize him. He's going to be out of it for a while, but he should be okay. Jesus, Madison said again. She pressed her hand against her forehead for a moment, steadying herself. Okay, have you heard anything on the radio from Bennett's men? Lots of chatter, but nothing concrete. He knows you hit McPherson and he's sending teams out. I think he knows we're listening in, because he's keeping things close to the vest. It's safe to say you kicked up a hornet's nest, and we can expect some blowback sooner rather than later. Copy that. Lock that town down and hang tight. We'll be in touch. We'll be here. Be safe out there, Ingrid said. The line went dead. Madison turned away from the radio and faced the others. The news about Sasha had changed the air in the room. It had been heavy before. Now it was something worse. We can't keep up like this, Madison said. I know, Atticus said. So what do we do? Gideon asked. We know where Bennett is, Piper said. She paused, letting that settle, then continued. We go in and take him out. Let the pieces fall where they may. Gideon nodded. Piper's expression said she'd already made up her mind. But Atticus didn't nod, and neither did Connie. You don't think that's the right call? Piper asked. I'm thinking that even if we could get into Burlington and take him out, it wouldn't fix anything, Atticus said. And in fact, it might make things worse. How so? Gideon asked. He's the ringleader. Cut the head off, and the body dies. That may work for ninja clans, but not in the real world, Atticus said. If we take him out, it could set off a power struggle, with a lot of innocent people caught in the middle, Connie said. The room split along the disagreement, Piper and Gideon on one side wanting direct action, Atticus and Connie on the other, seeing the consequences past it. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody argued. They just stood on opposite sides of the question and let the silence do the work that arguing wouldn't. Madison stayed by the radio, not weighing in. She'd been in Kansas long enough to understand both sides of it. Bennett dead would solve one problem and create 10 more. Bennett alive meant more people in cages, more soldiers on the roads, more of the same slow grind that had been killing this part of the country for weeks. Neither answer was good. The only question was which kind of bad they could live with. Atticus paced the length of the room, his boots scuffing on the concrete. He walked to the wall with the maps, stared at them without really seeing them, then turned and walked back. The others watched him, recognizing the look. He was building something in his head, putting pieces together that hadn't fit before. He stopped pacing and reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. He looked at it for a moment, then held it out to Madison. Madison, can that radio reach Seattle? He asked. She looked at the paper, then at the radio, running the logistics in her head. I'll have to make a few adjustments, but I think I can do that. Atticus nodded. Good. Please set it up. I need to get my people on the line. Chapter 8. Madison spent the next several minutes working on the radio, adjusting the antenna cable and cycling through frequencies until the static thinned out into something that sounded like it might carry a signal across the distance they needed. She pulled the cable connection, cleaned the contact with her sleeve, and reseated it before cycling through the bands again. The rest of them watched her work without interrupting, none of them pretending that they could do it better. She made a few more adjustments, checked the connections one more time, then stood up from the chair. I think we're good, she said. It's all yours. Atticus nodded and took the seat. The chair was a metal folding type that creaked under his weight and sat too low for the table, but he adjusted without complaint. He set the frequency paper on the table beside the radio and looked around for something to write with. His eyes moved across the table, then to the shelves, then back to Madison, who realized what he was looking for. She grabbed a notebook and pen from the shelf behind her and slid them across to him. "I appreciate it," Atticus said. He set the notebook open in front of him and took a moment to compose himself. The others stood behind him in a loose semicircle, close enough to hear, but giving him the space to work. Connie leaned against the wall with her arms crossed, still conserving energy. Piper had finished patching Connie up and was standing beside Gideon, who had cleaned his sword and sheathed it for the first time since they'd entered the school. Atticus dialed in the frequency from the paper, watched the indicator settle, and pressed the talk button. Seattle base, come in." Static filled the room. The speaker hissed and popped, the sound of a signal reaching across thousands of miles of open air, and finding nothing on the other end. Atticus waited, counting the seconds in his head. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, filling the gaps between the static with a sound that was almost worse than silence. "Seattle base, do you copy?" More static. More nothing. The silence stretched out long enough that the others started exchanging glances behind him. Piper looked at Madison, who gave a small shake of her head that said, "Give it time." Connie just stared at the radio with her arms still crossed, her expression unreadable. "Where the hell did Seattle go?" Gideon asked. "That's a good question," Atticus said. He hit the button again, leaning closer to the microphone this time. "Seattle base, do you copy? This is Atticus Windward, and I need someone to respond." A brief pause, and then the line crackled to life. A voice came through, young and tired and carrying the tone of someone who had been fielding calls for too long. "This is Seattle base." "Thank God," Atticus said. "This is Atticus Windward. I need to speak to Clint or Corporal Gadd." "Get in line." Atticus pulled back from the microphone slightly, caught off guard. The room behind him went quiet. "Excuse me?" Atticus said. "I said you're going to have to get in line." The radio operator paused, and when he came back, his voice had the flat edge of someone who had stopped caring about diplomacy several hours ago. "It's a shit show up here, and you're not a priority at the moment." Atticus sat still for a beat, letting the words settle. Then he leaned forward, pressed the talk button, and spoke with the kind of controlled force that didn't leave room for discussion. "Now you listen up and listen good. Those two sent me and some friends on a little excursion to Kansas. And if you want to talk about a shit show, I could spend the next day and a half telling you what we've been through. Now I don't give a good goddamn if the city is burning down around you. Go find one of them and put them on the line." A momentary pause. "Stand by," the operator said. The line went quiet. Atticus released the talk button and leaned back in the chair, rolling his shoulders. He could feel the eyes on him and turned to find all four of them staring. "What?" he said. "That was quite the performance there," Gideon said. "Did I pull off the intensity convincingly?" "I think you did, at least for a direct-to-VHS movie. We might have needed a second take if this was for the big screen." Atticus chuckled and shook his head, but the smile dropped as soon as the radio came back to life. He snapped forward in the chair, his hand on the talk button, before the first word was finished. "Atticus, are you there?" "Yeah, Clint, I'm here," Atticus said. "What the hell is going on up there?" "The militia hit us, and hit us hard." Clint's voice was steady but worn, the voice of someone running on duty and caffeine, and not much else. "We're still digging our way out and figuring out the damage, but we lost a lot of good people." The words landed in the room with a weight that everyone felt. Seattle had been the one place that seemed like it had its act together, the one stronghold that was building something instead of just surviving. If the militia could hit them hard enough to make Clint sound like this, then nowhere was as safe as they had been telling themselves. Atticus tensed in the chair, his hand tightening around the pen he hadn't used yet. "What about Susie and Evelyn?" he asked. "Don't worry, they're both safe. I checked on them personally this morning. They mostly hit us in the south of the city, so they were never in any real danger." Atticus closed his eyes and let out a long breath. His grip on the pen loosened and he set it down on the notebook, pressing his palm flat against the table for a moment. Behind him, the room stayed quiet. None of them knew who Susie and Evelyn were, but they could read the relief in his posture well enough to understand what those names meant to him. Whatever Atticus had been carrying since they'd heard Seattle was in trouble, he'd just set half of it down. When he opened his eyes, the tension in his shoulders had dropped by half. "Thank God," he said, "and thank you for checking on them." "It's the least I can do," Clint said. "Now, what's your situation out there?" "It's going about as well for us as it is for you," Atticus said. Not exactly the report I was hoping for. Bennett has this place locked down pretty tight. We've managed to find Madison and Connie, but it's taken a toll on us. How bad? Clint asked. Sasha is dead. Buck is hanging on, but is out of commission. The rest of us are bruised up pretty good. The line was quiet for a moment. When Clint came back, his voice had shifted, the weariness replaced by something more focused. Do you have a line on Bennett? Clint asked. Atticus looked over his shoulder at Connie and Madison. Both of them met his eyes and nodded. I think so, Atticus said. Do you have a plan to get him? We're working on it. Still trying to figure out the best course of action, Atticus said. There was a pause on the other end, not long, but deliberate. When Clint came back, his voice had shifted again, the weariness set aside in favor of something more direct. I trust your judgment fully, Atticus. The main objective is to make sure he doesn't expand out of Kansas. How you accomplish that is completely up to you. Understood, Clint, Atticus said. I'm not trying to rush you, Atticus, but I have a lot of fires to put out up here, some of those being literal fires. Is there anything else I can do for you? Atticus paused. He looked down at the notebook, then at the radio, then at the table in front of him. The pen sat untouched beside a blank page. He'd come into this call hoping for options, and what he'd gotten instead was confirmation that the only option was the one he'd been carrying in his back pocket since before they'd left Seattle. The room behind him was silent. Everyone waiting. He could feel the weight of what he was about to say before he said it, the line he was about to cross that couldn't be uncrossed once the words left his mouth. I know you got hit by the militia, so I wanted to confirm that my ace in the hole is still available, Atticus said. Yes, it's all yours, Clint said. I just need to know where to send it. Understood. I'll be in touch shortly about that. I'll make sure the radio operator is in the loop. Good luck. You too, Clint, Atticus said. The line went dead. The static faded to a low hiss and then silence as the transmission cut out. Atticus sat with his hand on the radio for a moment, staring at the speaker like he was waiting for it to say something else. The conversation with Clint had confirmed two things. Seattle was in bad shape, which meant whatever resources they'd been hoping for weren't coming anytime soon, and the mission in Kansas was still theirs to finish, however they saw fit. He spun the chair around to face the room. 4 sets of eyes were locked on him, and none of them looked patient. You have an ace in the hole? Madison asked. And you're just sharing that with us now? Gideon said. I wasn't fully comfortable with it, and didn't want it to be an option until we knew what we were dealing with, Atticus said. So what is it? Connie asked. Atticus looked at each of them in turn. It's a cruise missile. Chapter 9. Everyone stared at Atticus. The words hung in the air of the small concrete room like smoke, refusing to dissipate. A cruise missile. The man had been sitting on a cruise missile for the entire operation and hadn't said a word about it. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the only sound in a room that had gone completely still. Connie looked at Madison, trying to gauge whether this was normal behavior for the group. Madison's expression made it clear that it was not. I'm sorry. Would you mind repeating that for everyone? Gideon said. It's a cruise missile, Atticus said. How in the hell did you get a cruise missile? Piper asked. Clint said I had one at my disposal if I needed it, Atticus said. You mean we could have taken out Bennett anytime we wanted to this whole time? Madison said. In theory, yes. Madison shook her head and walked away from the group, pacing to the far wall before turning around. The look on her face was caught somewhere between disbelief and anger, neither one winning out. Jesus, she said. And you didn't think that was important information to share? Would it have changed anything we've done up to this point? Atticus asked. Madison stared at him. She wanted to lay into him. That much was obvious. Her jaw was set and her hands were tight at her sides, and everything in her posture said she had a speech ready to go. But she held it, because he was right, and she knew it. Nothing they'd done in Kansas, from securing Ellsworth to rescuing Piper at the farm to breaking Connie out of that school, would have gone any differently with a cruise missile in their back pocket. No, it wouldn't, Madison said. But still, it's relevant information. And now you know what we have, Atticus said. Is there anything else you're not sharing with us? Yeah, a nuke, maybe a strike team, Gideon said. Some other ninjas. He chuckled at the last one. Nobody else did. The room stayed quiet, and Gideon raised a hand in concession. "Sorry," he said. "That's all I got," Atticus said. "Now the question is, what do we do with it?" "We ram it down Bennett's throat," Piper said. "And then what?" Connie asked. "We let everyone who might want to claim the throne know that there's more where that came from," Piper said. "But we don't," Gideon said. "They don't know that." "So you want to bluff them?" Madison asked. "Every former soldier under his command knows how nasty those things are," Piper said. "The last thing they are going to want is having one of them hanging over their heads." Setting aside the fact that you're putting way too much faith in the common sense amongst the rank and file, at some point someone is going to figure out that we aren't watching all of them, Madison said. The bluff falls apart after that. "But a bluff could work on one man," Atticus said, "especially one who wants to hold on to power." "That definitely describes Bennett," Connie said. "What good is bluffing him going to do?" Piper asked. "He's not going to free the prisoners, and he's not going to leave people alone." Atticus was quiet for a few moments. He stood by the table with his arms folded, staring at the floor, working through something in his head that he clearly didn't like. When he finally spoke, he let out a deep sigh before the words came. "I bet he would let you and your people leave Kansas," Atticus said. Piper, Madison, and Connie all stared at him. The room went silent again, but this silence was different. This one had an edge to it. Gideon stayed out of it, leaning against the wall with his arms folded, watching the conversation unfold like a man who knew when to let other people do the talking. "You want to cut and run?" Piper asked. "We don't have a lot of good options, Piper. He's already attacked you once, and with as pissed off as he undoubtedly is, he's going to strike again. But we can get your people out, get them to Seattle or someplace that's safe. No more fighting, no more looking over your shoulder." "No more home?" Connie said quietly. The word landed harder than anything else that had been said in the room. Home. The thing that every person in Kansas had been fighting to hold on to since day zero. The piece of ground they'd chosen to defend because it was theirs. Giving it up wasn't the same as losing a battle. It was admitting that the battle wasn't worth fighting anymore. "I'm resigned to the fact that I'll never see Texas again," Atticus said. "But I got my little girl, and anywhere with her is home." The room went quiet again. Not the hostile kind. The kind where people are sitting with something they don't want to accept, but can't find a reason to reject. Piper leaned against the wall and crossed her arms, staring at the ceiling. Madison stood by the maps with her hands on her hips. Connie hadn't moved from her spot, her expression unreadable. "I know it's not ideal, none of this is," Atticus said, "but it's something that we can do. At least, I think we can." More silence, more thinking. The kind of decision that couldn't be rushed, even though the clock outside this room was still ticking. "It would be nice to not have to worry about zombies," Madison said, "or if some asshole is going to take a pot shot at you while you're driving down the highway. Or drop a load of those things on your doorstep in the middle of the night," Piper said. "So, how do we do it?" Connie asked. "He's going to be on high alert in Burlington, so we're not going to be able to get close to him." "You might not be able to, but I might," Atticus said. "Same goes for me," Gideon said. Atticus glanced over at Gideon, who shrugged as if the answer were obvious. He'd uncrossed his arms and straightened up from the wall, the relaxed posture replaced by something more engaged. When the conversation shifted from whether to do something to how to do it, that was where Gideon came alive. "A bunch of military tough guys," Gideon said. "Surely someone is going to know who I am." Piper let out a sigh, shaking her head. "I hate the fact that you're right." "So what's the plan then?" Connie asked. "We get to Burlington, figure out how to get in, and see if we can't get an audience," Atticus said. "Two strangers walking into a military camp aren't a threat. They're a curiosity, especially when one of them is a movie star." "If he's going to take you seriously, then we're going to need to blow something up," Connie said. Madison perked up. She turned to the wall where the maps were pinned, pulled one of them down, and carried it over to the table. She spread it flat, and the others gathered around, leaning in as her finger traced south from Burlington, along a highway, before stopping on a point just outside the city limits. The spot was marked with a small pencil notation in Madison's handwriting, one of several scattered across the map. "And I think I know what," Madison said. She tapped the spot on the map. "There's a big warehouse facility here, just outside of the city limits, far enough away that a missile strike isn't going to do any damage to the city, but close enough that they'll be able to feel the concussion blast in their bones. "What's in that warehouse?" Piper asked. "Cook said that they're using it as a holding pen for zombies," Madison said. "So if there are any guards, there won't be many." "And I can't imagine they'd put innocent civilians there," Piper said. "That's too important of a job." "That's my thinking," Madison said. Atticus studied the map for a moment, measuring the distance between the warehouse and the town with his eyes. Close enough to send a message, far enough to keep the blast from hurting anyone who didn't deserve it. It was as clean a target as they were going to find. "That's the play then," Atticus said. "Can you get me coordinates?" Madison nodded. "Yeah, but it's going to take me a little while to confirm them." "That works, because I don't want to be on the road again until after dark," Atticus said. Madison nodded and tapped Piper on the arm, motioning for her to follow. The two of them moved over to the radio and the maps on the far side of the room, working together on getting the proper coordinates locked down. Their conversation was low and technical, the language of people who had worked with military targeting before and understood that being off by a fraction meant the difference between a message and a disaster. The rest of the room settled into a quieter energy. Gideon sat down in one of the folding chairs and leaned back, closing his eyes but clearly not sleeping. Connie stayed where she was, watching Atticus, who was still standing by the table staring at the map Madison had left behind. The warehouse, the highway, the town, the pieces of a plan that was either going to change everything or get them all killed. "Do you think you can pull it off?" Connie asked. Atticus looked at her. She was thinner than she should have been, bruised in places that hadn't healed yet, wearing borrowed clothes and standing in a concrete box in the middle of nowhere. She deserved an honest answer. "I think we don't have any other option." The end.